Have you ever wondered why some places on maps are marked with nothing but blank space? My name is Jordan Hayes. I'm a wilderness ranger for the Canadian Wildlife Service, assigned to what's officially called Conservation Area 9 in the northern Mackenzie Mountains of the Northwest Territories. The government calls it a protected ecological reserve. The Dene communities nearby have other names for it, names that translate roughly to the silent place, or where animals don't go. But everyone who works here just calls it what it is, the no-go zone. Not because we don't go there, someone has to, but because for the past 43 years, only one ranger at a time has been stationed here, and we all follow the same 5 rules that keep us alive. Rules that have nothing to do with bear safety or emergency protocols. Rules that were written by the first ranger assigned here in 1981, a man named Vincent Moreau, who spent 11 years in this posting before retiring and passing those rules to his replacement. Rules that have been handed down through 4 rangers since then, each adding their own observations, their own close calls, their own proof that the rules work. And now those rules belong to me. If you stay until the end, I'll tell you exactly what those 5 rules are. Not the official conservation area protocols that are in my employee handbook, though those matter too. The other rules. The ones written in a journal that's been kept by every ranger who's worked this zone. The ones that explain why my cabin has no windows on the north side. Why I never use my radio after 9 p.m. Why there's a line of stones exactly 100 meters from my door that I never ever cross after sunset. Why my predecessor, a woman named Alice Tanner who held this posting for 8 years, handed me that journal on my first day and said only 6 words, "Read it tonight. Follow them exactly." Because in the no-go zone, there are things that don't follow the normal rules of wilderness. Things that have been here longer than Canada has been a country. Things that the Dene knowledge keepers tried to warn the government about when this area was first designated. And things that every ranger who's worked here has learned to live with, not by confronting them or studying them or trying to explain them, but by following 5 simple rules that create a boundary between us and whatever shares this territory. Rules I'm going to tell you about. Rules I followed for 3 years without violation. Rules that kept Alice alive for 8 years, and Vincent for 11 before that. And rules that I broke once, just once in my 2nd month here, and learned why they exist in the most terrifying way possible. I grew up in Yellowknife, 600 kilometers south of here. My father was a bush pilot. My mother worked for the territorial government in natural resources. I spent my childhood flying into remote areas, learning to navigate by landmarks, understanding that the North operates differently than the rest of Canada, that distances are measured differently, that isolation isn't just physical but temporal. You can be 2 hours by plane from the nearest town, but if weather closes in, you might as well be on another planet. After studying ecology and wilderness management at the University of Alberta, I wanted to work somewhere truly remote. Somewhere that still felt wild in ways that most of Canada doesn't anymore. When I saw the posting for Conservation Area 9, I didn't know what I was applying for. The job description was deliberately vague. Remote wilderness monitoring position. Extended solo deployment. Candidates must be comfortable with isolation and able to follow detailed protocols without supervision. The salary was almost double what similar positions paid. The term was open-ended. You could stay as long as you wanted, but once you left, you couldn't return. And the posting required a face-to-face interview in Yellowknife with the outgoing ranger. I met Alice Tanner on a gray morning in March 3 years ago. She was in her late 40s, lean and weathered in the way people get when they spend most of their time outside in harsh conditions. She didn't ask me about my qualifications or experience. Instead, she asked me strange questions. Could I handle being completely alone for months at a time? Did I have family or relationships that would suffer from my absence? Was I comfortable with ambiguity, with not having explanations for things I might observe? Could I follow rules without needing to understand their purpose? I answered honestly, yes to all of it. I wanted isolation. I wanted mystery. I wanted work that mattered in ways I couldn't predict. She studied me for a long moment. Then she said, "The job isn't what you think. It's not about wildlife monitoring or ecological research. I mean, you'll do that. It's in your contract. But the real work is maintaining boundaries, following protocols that keep you safe in a place where the normal rules don't quite apply. If you take this job, you'll be alone in a way you've never experienced. And you'll see things that you won't be able to explain or report or share with anyone except the next ranger who takes your place. Can you handle that?" I said I could. I don't think I really understood what I was agreeing to. She handed me a folder with my official assignment papers, my access codes, and my supply schedule. Then she handed me something else. A journal, leather-bound, worn, with pages that had been written in by multiple hands over decades. "This isn't official," she said. "The Canadian Wildlife Service doesn't acknowledge this exists. But every ranger who's worked Area 9 has kept this journal, has added to it. I have learned from it. Read it completely before you arrive at the cabin. Memorize the 5 rules. Then follow them without exception. That's how you survive out there. Not by being brave or resourceful or well-trained. By following rules that don't make sense until you've been there long enough to understand why they matter. And by the time you understand, you'll be grateful they exist." I flew into the zone 2 weeks later. A helicopter from Yellowknife, carrying me and 3 months of supplies. The flight took 4 hours, crossing endless boreal forests that gradually thinned as we climbed into the mountains. The Mackenzie Range in winter is stark, gray rock, white snow, black spruce clinging to valleys. The helicopter pilot, a Dene man named Samuel who'd flown this route for 20 years, didn't talk much during the flight. But as we approached the landing zone, he pointed down at a valley below us. "That's where you'll be," he said. "You see the cabin?" I saw it. A small structure on the south slope of a valley, surrounded by sparse forest. Isolated. Completely alone. No roads. No other structures visible in any direction. "You see that line of stones?" Samuel continued. I saw them too. A clear line of white stones running in a wide arc north of the cabin, maybe 100 meters away. Your predecessor put those there. Every ranger adds to them. You'll understand why. Just follow the rules, okay? Alice made it 8 years. You can too. But only if you follow the rules. The cabin was exactly as Alice had described. 1 room, wood stove, sleeping platform, work desk, radio equipment, shelves stocked with supplies, and no windows on the north wall, just solid logs. The south wall had 2 windows. The east and west walls each had 1, but the north, the side facing deeper into the mountains, was blind. The journal explained why, but I didn't fully understand until later. I spent my first week settling in, learning the routine, daily weather readings, wildlife observations, though I saw almost no animals, which was unusual for wilderness this remote, equipment checks, radio calls to the district office, but only between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., never earlier, never later, and never after 9 p.m. The official reason was to preserve battery power. The real reason was in the journal. I read that journal cover to cover on my first night, by lantern light, in the cabin that would be my home for however long I stayed. It started with Vincent Moreau's handwriting, dated April 1981. His first entry was simple. Arrived today. The Dene elders from Fort McPherson came to meet me before I flew in. They wanted to explain why this place is different. Why don't their people hunt here anymore? Why animals avoid certain areas? I listened politely but didn't really believe it. 2 weeks later, I believe. I believe completely, and I've started writing down what works, what keeps me safe, what allows me to do this job without losing my mind or my life. The journal continued through his 11 years, documenting observations, rules, incidents, close calls. Then Alice's handwriting took over. 8 years of entries, same patterns, same warnings, same rules. And now it was my turn to add to it. The 5 rules were written on the first page in Vincent's careful handwriting, but they'd been reinforced and annotated by every ranger since. I memorized them that first night. Rule 1. Never go north of the stone line after sunset. The annotations explained that north meant the direction toward the deeper mountains, where the valley led into increasingly remote terrain. The stone line marked a boundary. What kind of boundary wasn't explained in those early entries? Just that crossing it after dark had consequences. Rule 2. If you hear your name called from outside the cabin, do not answer and do not look. This rule had the most annotations. Vincent had written, "It will sound exactly like someone you know." Exactly. Don't trust it. Alice had added, "It knows your voice too. It can mimic." Stay inside. Stay quiet. Rule 3. Never use the radio after 9 p.m. The technical explanation was battery conservation. The real explanation, written in Vincent's notes. They can hear it. The signal draws attention. After 9 p.m. they're most active. Rule 4. If you find tracks that don't match any known animal, photograph them and leave the area immediately. This rule had incident reports attached, descriptions of prints, strange patterns, things Vincent and Alice had both documented. Rule 5. Trust your instincts about the North Valley. If it feels wrong, leave. Alice had underlined this one multiple times. Had written, "You'll know the feeling. It's distinct. It's not fear. It's certainty. When you feel it, trust it." I thought I understood. I thought I was prepared. I thought that 3 years of northern experience and a degree in ecology qualified me for this. But you can't really prepare for the no-go zone. You can only survive it by following rules that work whether or not you understand them. Rules that create boundaries with something that was here long before the Canadian Wildlife Service drew maps and designated protected areas. Something that the Dene communities have known about for generations. Something that doesn't appear in any wildlife database or scientific study. Something I was about to encounter firsthand. Because on my 8th day in the zone I broke Rule 5. Not intentionally. But I went into the North Valley when it felt wrong, when every instinct told me to turn back, when the boundary I should have respected was clear. And I learned why the rules exist. Why did Vincent last 11 years by following them? Why did Alice last 8? Why rangers before them had quit after just months, the ones who didn't follow the rules carefully enough. And why I would spend the rest of my time in this posting making absolutely certain I never ever broke those rules again. The first week passed in a routine that felt almost normal. I documented weather patterns, recorded the sparse wildlife sightings, a few ravens, some old caribou tracks, a fox print near the creek, but nothing like the density you'd expect in protected wilderness. The silence was notable. Not peaceful silence. Empty silence. Like the forest was holding its breath. I radioed in daily during the permitted window. Filed my reports. Followed the rules exactly as written. The stone line became part of my mental map. A boundary I was aware of constantly. The north wall of the cabin felt different than the others. More solid. More necessary. And I didn't use the radio after 9 p.m., though I wasn't sure why that mattered. Yet, on the 8th day, I decided to survey the North Valley. It was part of my job, documenting the watershed, checking for signs of human intrusion, mapping the terrain. The valley extended north from my cabin, gradually climbing into more remote mountains. According to my maps, it was pristine wilderness. According to the Dene elders' warnings that Vincent had recorded, it was something else. But it was midday, clear weather, good visibility, and I was staying well south of the stone line, which was the only directional restriction I fully understood. The rule said don't go north of the stones after sunset. It was 1 p.m. I had hours of daylight. I wasn't breaking any rules. The valley felt wrong from the start. I should have turned back then. Rule 5 clearly stated trust your instincts. But I rationalized. New environment, unfamiliar terrain, natural nervousness. I kept going. The trees thinned as I climbed. The silence deepened, and I started noticing things. The snow was undisturbed. No tracks. No scat. No signs of any animal activity. Not even birds. In the healthy wilderness, you see signs of life everywhere. Here, nothing. Like animals knew to avoid this area. Like they followed their own version of the rules. About 2 kilometers in, I found the first marker. A cairn. Stones stacked deliberately. Too precise to be natural. I approached carefully. The stones were weathered, but the construction was intentional. And carved into the largest stone in what looked like syllabic writing, the Dene script, were symbols I couldn't read. I photographed them. Made notes. Then I saw the second cairn. 50 meters further. Then a third. They formed a line. A boundary. I was standing on the wrong side of it. The feeling hit me then. Not fear. Not anxiety. Certainty. Absolute certainty that I should not be here. That this place was marked off for reasons that predated my job description. That I was trespassing. Rule 5 activated in my mind like an alarm. If it feels wrong, leave. I turned my head back. And that's when I saw the tracks. They weren't there before. I was sure of it. I'd been watching the ground carefully, documenting my route. These tracks appeared behind me, between me and the way I'd come. They were large. Much larger than human. The print shape was wrong. Not bear. Not moose. Not a wolf. Something bipedal, but with proportions that didn't match. The stride length was enormous. Over 2 meters between prints. And they were fresh. Crisp edges in the snow. Made within the last few minutes. Made while I was examining the cairns. Rule 4. If you find tracks that don't match any known animal, photograph them and leave immediately. I took 3 quick photos. Then I left. Not running, that felt dangerous somehow. But walking quickly, deliberately back toward the cabin. Trying not to look behind me. Trying not to think about the fact that something had approached while I was distracted. Had circled around me. Had placed itself between me and safety. The feeling of wrongness intensified with every step. Not panic. Worse. The certainty that I was being allowed to leave. That something was watching me go and choosing not to stop me. Choosing. Consciously. I made it back to the stone line just after 3 p.m. The moment I crossed it, the pressure released. The wrongness faded. I could breathe normally again. I went into the cabin and locked the door, which felt absurd, a locked door against something that could clearly move through wilderness without being seen. But I did it anyway. Then I looked at the photos I'd taken. The tracks were clear. Unmistakable. Too large. Wrong shape. And in the third photo, taken last, there was something in the background. Just visible at the tree line. A shape. Tall. Too tall to be human. Difficult to focus on. Like it existed slightly out of phase with the surrounding environment. I deleted that photo immediately. Kept the 2 showing just the tracks. Added them to the journal that night with shaking hands. Vincent had documented similar tracks in 1983. Described the same wrongness. The same feeling of being observed and evaluated. Alice had documented them in her second year. Had written, Rule 4 exists because photographing is all you should do. Following them is fatal. 2 rangers before Vincent tried. Neither finished their terms. One requested emergency evacuation after 3 months. The other lasted 6 weeks. Both reported the same thing: going too far north, finding tracks, following them, and encountering something they couldn't explain and wouldn't discuss. The Wildlife Service has their statements sealed. I've never read them. Don't need to. The tracks are warning enough. I added my entry, dated it, describe exactly what happened. Then I wrote in capital letters, Rule 5 is not optional. Turn back when it feels wrong. And I vowed to myself that I would never ignore that feeling again. Never rationalize it away. Never convince myself I was just nervous or unfamiliar. Because that feeling wasn't intuition. It was information. It was the boundary making itself known. And respecting it was the only thing that had allowed me to come back. That night, I reread the entire journal with new understanding. What had seemed like superstitious caution now read as practical survival protocol. The 5 rules weren't arbitrary. They were specific responses to specific threats that every ranger had documented. Vincent's entries from the early 1980s laid the foundation. He'd arrived skeptical, though the Dene warnings were cultural tradition rather than practical advice. His first month was quiet. Then he started noticing the patterns. Animals avoiding the North Valley, strange sounds at night, and the voices. He documented his first experience with Rule 2 in June 1981. Heard my sister calling my name at 11 p.m. She lives in Montreal. Haven't spoken to her in months. The voice was exact. Called 3 times from just north of the cabin. I went to the door. I almost opened it. Then remembered what the elders said. Don't answer voices in the dark. Stayed inside. Silent. After an hour it stopped. But I heard footsteps. Heavy. Circling the cabin. Testing. In the morning I found prints in the snow. Not human. Not bear. Something else. Something that knew my sister's voice. Alice's entries added detail. She documented the radio issue, Rule 3, in her first year. Had used the radio at 10 p.m. to call in an equipment issue. The response she got wasn't from the district office. The voice was wrong. The words were almost right but slightly off. Like something had intercepted the signal and was trying to respond appropriately, but didn't quite understand human communication patterns. She'd shut the radio off immediately. In the morning, found her antenna cable had been pulled loose. Something had tried to trace the signal. Had approached the cabin while she was transmitting. The district office confirmed the next day they'd never received her call. Whatever responded, it wasn't human. Rule 1, the stone line had the longest history. The Dene communities had marked territorial boundaries here for generations. Vincent learned this from extended conversations with elders in Fort McPherson. The stones weren't just markers. They were a negotiated boundary, a line both sides respected. The Dene had learned through centuries of experience where it was safe to hunt, to travel, to camp. Where it wasn't, the stones marked that knowledge. Vincent added to the line during his years. Alice expanded it. Each ranger extends the safe zone slightly, marking clearly where the boundary lay. After dark, that boundary mattered absolutely. Cross it at night and you entered territory that wasn't yours. Territory that was claimed. Territory that would be defended. I spent weeks processing this information, reconciling my scientific training with observations that couldn't be explained conventionally. The tracks I'd found didn't match any known species. The feeling of wrongness in the North Valley wasn't psychological. It was consistent, specific, and shared by every ranger. The voices weren't auditory hallucinations. They were documented across multiple ranges over decades. And the radio interference wasn't equipment failure, it was targeted, intelligent, responsive. By my second month, I'd settled into full compliance with the rules. I expanded the stone line slightly, adding markers to clearly define the boundary. I never went north of it after 4 p.m., giving myself margin for error. I ignored sounds from outside after dark, no matter how familiar they seemed. I kept radio silence after 8 p.m., and I trusted the feeling of wrongness completely, turning back immediately whenever it manifested. But I also started noticing other patterns. The zone had rhythms. Certain times were more active than others. The new moon periods were the worst, 3 nights of increased activity. Sounds, movements at the tree line. The feeling of being observed from the north intensified. Vincent had noted this. Alice had confirmed it. I added my own observations. The boundary wasn't static. It was maintained by both sides. We stayed south of the stones. They stayed north. Mostly. But during new moons they tested, approached closer, made their presence more obvious. Why? The journal didn't explain, just documented the pattern. I also noticed the tracks appeared in specific locations. Always north of the stones, always in the deeper valley, and always in areas where the forest had particular characteristics, older trees, certain terrain features, proximity to water sources, like they followed routes, had territories within the larger territory, moved with purpose and pattern. This wasn't random wildlife. This was intelligent use of landscape, territorial behavior, social organization. By my 6th month, the isolation was affecting me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not loneliness, I prepared for that, but a constant hyper-awareness. I was always monitoring, always checking the stone line, always listening for sounds that shouldn't be there, always watching the tree line. The psychological weight of maintaining boundaries with something invisible but undeniably present was exhausting. I started to understand why Alice had lasted only 8 years, why Vincent had retired after 11. This wasn't a posting you could do indefinitely. Eventually, the stress accumulated. The weight became too much. I had dreams, recurring, walking north past the stones, following the valley deeper into the mountains, finding structures, not human structures, something else, built with purpose but following different logic, different geometry. And in the dreams I was welcomed, expected, like I was late for an appointment I'd made but couldn't remember making. The dreams felt less like unconscious processing and more like invitations, like something was trying to communicate, to lure, to convince me that the boundary was unnecessary, that crossing would be safe, that I belonged on the other side. I mentioned this during a rare radio call with the district coordinator, a woman named Patricia Chun who managed the zone assignments. She wasn't surprised. All the rangers report similar dreams, she said. We think it's psychological pressure from isolation, extended exposure to the unknown. Your brain is trying to resolve the ambiguity. The important thing is recognizing them as just dreams. Don't act on them. Don't start thinking the rules don't apply to you. That's when rangers get in trouble. What happens to rangers who get in trouble? I asked. Long pause. Then, we've had 12 rangers assigned to Area 9 since 1981. For completed long terms, Vincent, Alice, 2 others before them. 5 quit within the first year. They're fine. Transferred to other postings. But 3 requested emergency extraction. Violated protocols, saw things they couldn't process. They're not in the field anymore. Medical leave, psychological support. The service takes care of them, but they can't talk about what happened. Non-disclosure agreements, for their own protection as much as anything. The point is, follow the rules. Trust the journal. Don't experiment. Don't test boundaries. That's how you make it through. In my 8th month, I had my closest call since the North Valley incident. It was March. Deep winter. I'd been following the rules perfectly for months. Had added my own observations to the journal. Had maintained the stone line. Had respected every protocol. But I made a mistake. A small one. A timing error that nearly cost me everything. I'd been out on a day survey, documenting ice conditions on the creek system. I lost track of time. Got focused on my work. Didn't notice the sun dropping. When I finally checked my watch, it was 8:47 p.m. I was a kilometer north of the cabin. Not past the stone line, but close to it. And it was dark. Full dark. Stars out. Temperature dropping fast. Rule 1 violation. I was north of the stone line after sunset. Technically, I was south of it just barely, but I was far enough north that the boundary was close. Too close. And I felt it immediately. That wrongness. That certainty. But this time it was different. This time it wasn't saying leave this area. It was saying you're in danger right now. I started back to the cabin. Walking quickly but not running. Running triggers predator response. Vincent had noted that. Stay calm. Deliberate. Show you're leaving but don't show fear. I made it 50 meters. Then I heard it. My mother's voice. Calling my name. From the north. From just beyond the stone line. Jordan? Jordan, honey, I'm lost. I need help. Can you hear me? Rule 2. Don't answer. Don't look. The voice was perfect. Exactly my mother. Same tone. Same inflection. Same endearment she'd used since I was a child. My mother was in Yellowknife, 600 kilometers away. I knew this. I knew the voice wasn't her. But knowing didn't make it less convincing. Didn't make it less compelling to respond. To help. To look. I kept walking. Didn't answer. Didn't turn toward the voice. Focused on the cabin lights ahead. The voice called again. Closer now. Moving parallel to my path. Keeping pace. Jordan, please. I fell. I think my leg is broken. I need you to help me. Why won't you answer? My hands were shaking. Every instinct screamed to respond. To help. To at least look. But the rules were absolute. Rule 2 existed because people had answered. I had looked. And whatever happened next was bad enough that it ended their terms. Made them request emergency extraction. Put them on medical leave. The voice changed tactics. I became angry. Jordan Hayes, you answer me right now. I didn't raise you to ignore people who need help. Look at me when I'm talking to you. The anger was perfect too. Exactly how my mother sounded when she was frustrated with me. The mimicry was flawless. And it was getting closer. I could hear footsteps now. Heavy. Crunching in the snow. Keeping pace with me but staying just in my peripheral vision. Just out of direct line of sight. I reached the stone line. Crossed it. 30 meters from the cabin now. The voice stopped mid-sentence. Cut off like someone had flipped a switch. The footsteps stopped. And in the sudden silence I heard something else. A sound like breathing. Deep. Slow. Patient. Just on the other side of the boundary I'd crossed. Waiting. I made it to the cabin. Got inside. Locked the door. I stood there shaking for 20 minutes. Then I went to the south window, the only one I allowed myself to look through after dark. And I didn't see anything. But I felt watched. Observed. Like something had tested me and I'd passed. Barely. I documented everything in the journal that night. Added a new note to Rule 2. The mimicry is perfect. Flawless. It knows not just voices but patterns. Relationship dynamics. How to make you feel guilty for not responding. Don't trust it. Don't engage. The boundary works, but only if you respect it completely. And I added a new personal rule. Never stay out past 7 p.m. Give myself a full margin for error. Never cut it that close again. After that incident, my entire approach changed. I stopped thinking of the rules as guidelines and started treating them as absolute boundaries. I marked my watch with a 7 p.m. alarm. I carried a headlamp even for short day trips. I expanded the stone line further, giving myself more buffer. And I started paying closer attention to the patterns the journal documented. Not just following rules, but understanding why they worked. Understanding what they protected me from. The journal revealed something I hadn't fully appreciated before. The 5 rules weren't just about avoiding danger. They were about maintaining a relationship, a negotiated coexistence. The stone line wasn't a barrier we built to keep them out. It was a boundary both sides respected. We stayed south. They stayed north. The rules enforced our side of that agreement. When we broke them, went too far north, responded to voices, used the radio at wrong times, we violated the agreement. And violations had consequences. But when we followed the rules, when we respected the boundary, they respected it too. The North Valley remained theirs. The South remained ours. The zone functioned as both a human conservation area and something else's territory. Shared space managed through protocols developed over decades. Not through confrontation or study or military presence. Through respect. Through boundaries. Through rules that worked because both sides followed them. I started to see my job differently. I wasn't just monitoring wilderness. I was maintaining peace. A truce. Between human presence and something that predated that presence. Something that had been here when the Dene first arrived, that had been here when Europeans drew their maps, would be here long after the Canadian Wildlife Service existed. My job was to make sure that truce held. To make sure the boundary was respected. To make sure future rangers inherited a functioning system. By my first year anniversary, I'd settled into something like routine. I know the patterns now. Knew when activity increased. Knew which areas felt wrong and should be avoided. Knew the sounds that mattered and the ones that didn't. And I'd added substantially to the journal. New observations. New close calls. New confirmations that the rules worked. Following them exactly without exception kept me safe. I also started corresponding more with Patricia Chun about the history of the zone. She was reluctant to share classified information, but she confirmed some things. The area had been monitored since the 1950s, before it was officially designated a conservation area. It was restricted military territory. Before that, the Dene had marked it as sacred land where hunting was forbidden. The government designation just formalized what had been understood for generations. This was not normal wilderness. It required special handling, special protocols, special people willing to live according to rules they might never fully understand. Why don't we study it? I asked during one call. Why don't we send research teams? Document what's actually here. We tried, Patricia said. In the early years, before the Ranger Protocol was established, we sent teams, scientists, military observers. None of them lasted. Equipment malfunctioned. People became disoriented. Some requested extraction within days. Others violated safety protocols and had to be removed. We learned that sustained presence required someone willing to follow rules rather than break them for research purposes. Someone who could accept ambiguity, accept that some things work without needing to know why. That's why we select rangers carefully. Why the posting is voluntary and well compensated. You're not there to understand. You're there to maintain. I thought about that constantly. About my role. About what I was maintaining. About whether the journal I kept would help future rangers or just perpetuate a system nobody fully understood. But the evidence was clear. The rules worked. For rangers had completed long terms by following them. Multiple rangers had failed by violating them. The choice was simple: follow the protocols and survive, or experiment and risk whatever consequences came from breaking the truce. I'm in my 3rd year now. I've documented over 100 observations in the journal. I've expanded the stone line. I've refined my understanding of the activity patterns. I've learned to read the wrongness feeling with precision, to distinguish between normal caution and genuine boundary warnings. And I've never violated the 5 rules again. Never gone north of the stones after sunset. Never answered voices. Never used the radio late. Never ignored tracks. Never dismissed the feeling of wrongness. The zone has taught me something I didn't learn in university. That wilderness isn't empty. That protected areas sometimes protect both directions, protecting nature from us, and protecting us from something in nature we don't understand. That indigenous knowledge often contains practical survival information encoded in cultural practice. And that some boundaries exist for reasons that science hasn't caught up with yet. Maybe never will. I don't know what shares this territory with me. The journal doesn't explain it. Vincent didn't know. Alice didn't know. I don't know. But I know it's intelligent. Know it's territorial. Know it's patient. Know it mimics. Knowing it tests boundaries. Know it follows patterns we can predict and prepare for. And know that the 5 rules create a framework for coexistence that's worked for over 40 years. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if the rules were made public. If the journal was published. If the truth about the no-go zone became widely known. Would people demand investigation? Demand answers? Demand that we confront or capture or study what's here? Probably. And that would end the truce. Would turn coexistence into conflict. Would break a peace that's been carefully maintained for generations. So the journal stays classified. Gets passed ranger to ranger. The rules stay unofficial. And the no-go zone stays protected. Not from human intrusion we're here, but from human hubris. From the assumption that every mystery needs to be solved. That every unknown needs to be known. That every boundary exists to be crossed. The 5 rules that kept Vincent alive for 11 years. That kept Alice alive for 8. That has kept me alive for 3. They're simple. Never go north of the stone line after sunset. If you hear your name called from outside, do not answer and do not look. Never use the radio after 9 p.m. If you find tracks that don't match any known animal, photograph them and leave immediately. Trust your instincts about the North Valley. If it feels wrong, leave. 5 simple rules. Based on decades of experience. Written in a journal by people who learned them the hard way. Maintained by a system that values survival over understanding. And enforced by something in the wilderness that will respect your boundaries if you respect theirs. I don't know how much longer I'll stay in the no-go zone. Alice lasted 8 years before the wait became too much. I'm at 3. Vincent made it 11. Every ranger has their limit, the point where the isolation and the constant vigilance and the weight of maintaining boundaries with the unknown becomes unsustainable. But for now I'm here. I'm following the rules. I'm keeping the peace. And I'm adding to the journal that will guide whoever comes after me. Because this posting isn't forever. Eventually, I'll train my replacement. I'll hand them the journal. I'll tell them what Alice told me. Read it tonight, follow it exactly. And I'll leave the zone knowing I did my job. Not by solving the mystery or confronting what's here or pushing boundaries to expand human knowledge. But by maintaining a system that works. By respecting rules that kept my predecessors alive. By understanding that some places on the map are blank not because we don't know what's there, but because we know just enough to understand that some things are better left alone. The no-go zone isn't empty. It's shared. And the 5 rules are how we share it without dying. That's enough knowledge for me. That's enough knowledge for anyone who takes this job. And that's the only knowledge I'll pass on when my time here ends.